Mark T. the Handyman here. Today we're going to take a look at some of the more common service calls on a home air conditioning. One of the more common service calls on an air conditioning is a bad capacitor. So what causes a capacitor to go bad? Overheating from prolonged running or excessive heat exposure can degrade the capacitor's internal components. Power surges from lightning strikes or electrical grid functions can overload the capacitor and cause it to fail. Improper installation, such as a capacitor that is not correctly sized, short circuits, loose connections, or assortment of other electrical problems can also cause a capacitor to fail. And sometimes it's just an old capacitor that fails. Another common service call is a dirty condenser coil, usually caused by a buildup of dirt and debris, cottonwood, anything that circulates in the air can restrict the airflow and can reduce the air conditioning energy efficiency, reduce the cooling efficiency, and also reduce the life of the compressor. All these things can cause excessive heat and high pressure in the refrigerant system. It's very important to check the outdoor coil at startup and then several times during the year, especially if there is a cottonwood tree in the neighborhood. In most air conditioning condensers, the air is being sucked from the outside and then exits through the top. When you need to clean your coil, you need to push the debris away from the coil, not through the coil. That usually means that taking the top off of the fan and blowing air through the coil or an air hose of some sort. Sometimes if the coil is covered with debris or cottonwood, you may have to take off the outer screen of the condenser and try to brush or wash away the dirt and debris from the coil. Never push the dirt through the coil. If you're using some type of hose to wash the coil, make sure you wash it down over the coil, not through the coil. Another common service call is ice on the evaporator. Usually the evaporator coil is iced up because the filter is dirty or refrigerant charge is low. Just as important as keeping the indoor coil clean, we need to keep the furnace filter clean. I recommend using a pleated filter, but not a high efficiency pleated filter. If you use a high efficiency filter, many times they don't allow enough airflow to get through the filter and will actually cause the coil to ice up. One of the things about the pleated filter though is you need to keep an eye on it more closely than a fiberglass filter because it catches more dirt and needs to be changed probably a little bit more often. Fiberglass filters are okay, but they really don't stop nearly as much as the pleated filters. One thing you don't want to do is to remove the filter and leave it out. That could cost you more money and a bigger headache than a dirty filter. That's because the filter's not there, the evaporator coil will catch the dirt. Cleaning the evaporator coil is a lot harder and a lot more expensive if a serviceman is called. Another reason your coil can get iced up is if your cooling system is low of refrigerant. When your cooling system is low of refrigerant, it lowers the suction pressure, which lowers the boiling point of the refrigerant to below freezing. The longer you let the air conditioner run, it causes the ice to accumulate on the coil and speed up the process of evaporator coil freezing. As the system continues to operate, the airflow gets less and less because more coil is being blocked. With ice, it sometimes freezes the suction line all the way back to the compressor outside in the condensing unit. If your coil gets iced up, the first thing you need to do is turn off the cooling system at the thermostat and run the fan in the on position so that the coil can defrost. After you turn the cooling off at the thermostat and turn the fan on, then you can call an HVAC service technician. It is much more time effective if the coil is already defrosted when the HVAC service technician arrives. That way, he doesn't have to defrost the coil when he starts to look for a leak, find the leak, and fix the leak. Unfortunately, many times as the fan is melting the ice is outside the perimeter of the condensate pan by the A coil, and the water will drip on the floor, so it's a good idea to put some towels around the furnace to absorb the water. And remember, your AC system is a hermetically sealed system, which means that it's not supposed to leak refrigerant. So if the system is low refrigerant, you will not only need the system recharged, but the HVAC technician must find the leak and repair the leak. If not, the refrigerant will leak out again, and that means another service call. Another common problem is a plugged condensate drain. Most of the time, it'll be the fitting that's plugged into the A-coil bottom at the elbow, and you can usually just blow that out with some air, or take the hose and blow through it. Either way, blow through the fitting and the hose and clean out the drain. Some units have a condensate pump because there's no floor drain close to the unit. If water is dripping on the ground and you have a condensate pump, it's a good idea to look at the pump and see if there's any crud or junk that's developed in the pan itself, in the pump section itself. It's actually a good idea to check and clean the pump at the beginning of the season and during the season. Also, there's a possibility that the condensate pump has gone bad. If that's the case, it will need to be replaced, but more than likely, it's going to be a plugged hose on your furnace. Another common service call is a burnt out condenser fan motor. The way you can tell that the motor is not working is the compressor will be working, but the fan will just be sitting there or humming or doing nothing. Maybe even the circuit breaker will be tripped. Sometimes it might just be a bad capacitor, so you'll have to replace the capacitor. Once in a while, you can take a screwdriver and spin the motor in the direction it's supposed to be going, and the motor will start. But generally, that means the motor has some kind of problem, like the motor is just dying and will need to be replaced. Usually, when we replace the fan motor, we remove this cover here, these screws, and this will flip right out. And that motor comes out fairly easy. The hardest part will be probably removing the blade from the fan. And it's always a good idea to replace the capacitor as well when you replace the motor. Another problem that occurs is a bad furnace blower motor. That's similar to a condenser fan motor in the respect that could be a bad capacitor. Sometimes you can reach your hand in the blower compartment and give that a spin also, and it might start. But most times, if you give it a spin and it starts, it usually means the motor is going to fail again and needs to be replaced. The furnace motor is a little more difficult to replace than the condenser fan motor, but it's definitely doable. Sometimes a service call is just a trip breaker on the condenser. Every so often, the circuit breaker will trip or a fuse may blow, and it's just a replacement of the fuse or resetting the circuit breaker. Not a big deal unless it happens again. Another problem that will cause a blown fuse or trip breaker on the outside unit, but not altogether common, is a defective compressor. Usually, when you get on a job, the circuit breaker is downstairs and is tripping, and as soon as you turn the system on, it trips again. First thing that I usually do when I get on a job like that, I check the compressor terminals to see if they're grounded. In most cases, that is a strong possibility. If the compressor is grounded and you need to change the compressor, you might also have to change the compressor contactor, because they sometimes can get welded together or they just are abused. It's not a bad idea to replace the contactor. That generally is a pretty expensive service call. Depending on the age of the unit, replacement of the unit might be the best choice. Sometimes you might find a wire that has come loose and the contactor has shorted out to the condenser cabinet. This will cause the fuse to blow, but a simple fix. Another call that occurs every so often is nothing is working. The first place to check is to make sure that the switch on the furnace is in the on position. Sometimes after changing a filter, the switch is accidentally left off and it needs to be turned back on. Or maybe there was children playing in the furnace room and they accidentally turned it off. The next place to check is to make sure that the thermostat is in the cooling position. If everything at the thermostat is in the right position, then you might want to check to see if the thermostat is bad, and the best way to do that is to remove the thermostat, but leave the thermostat plate and jump out the R terminal to the Y terminal. If it comes on, that means the thermostat is bad. Overall, replacing the thermostat is a simple task. Before you decide to get the new thermostat and change it, make sure that you take a picture of the thermostat wires on the thermostat wall plate. Usually, the thermostat wires are color-coded. The next problem might sound a little unusual, but I've seen it several times. The problem is that a critter of some sort has built their nest in the electrical compartment, and their nest is interfering with the condenser operation. So obviously, someone will need to remove the nest and repair any damage that the critter has caused. So these are what I would consider common service calls that I've encountered in my career. I hope some of these might help you when your home air conditioning isn't working. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up or a like. If you want to see more of my videos, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.